Hi, my name is Angelena Castro, an intern with the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and a student at North Carolina A&T State University. Today, I am joined by Dr. Lea Williams, an independent scholar, author, and educator. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. So, growing up, were there certain historical events that inspired you to become a public servant?
Wow, what a question. I don't know if growing up I thought about being a public servant. I grew up in a community that was small in the South, Paducah, Kentucky, in western Kentucky. It was a close knit community back in the 50s. I'm dating myself. Uh, it was a segregated community. But what that meant, which was quite wonderful, was that we had people in our community, African Americans, who really supported us as young people, both at school, in our church, and in the community. And so I grew up with the notion that education was important, that probably, and we didn't call it this at the time, but that servant leadership and community service were also important aspects of what we were to do. So that probably was the early beginnings of the idea that you don't just take, but you give back as well. And so, whatever you do, you make sure you are growing yourself, but that you're also giving something back to your community that will strengthen that community. So those were the early beginnings. The first, I would say, 17 years when I went off to college at Kentucky State. It was college then, it's Kentucky State University, and a land grant institution similar to North Carolina A&T, where you are in school. That opened up a whole new world for me because I was, for the first time, independent in college. I joined a sorority. I had a group of friends who are, many of them are still friends today, and this
That's
is
amazing.
decades after I graduated. But there again, I engaged in service projects. We gave back to the community through the sorority. And so this has been a pattern throughout life for me. I'm kind of intrigued that you call me a civil servant. I think of myself first and foremost as a teacher. And that is in itself a service area
Yes, ma'am.
because you are giving to the students that you teach. And I have always enjoyed that. Now, I spent more time in higher education administration than in teaching. But teaching was always a key part of my life because even when I had a full time job in administration, I did adjunct teaching. And that's something that I do now at Guilford Technical Community College, teaching English to students of other languages. So I enjoy the teaching. That's always been a key part. And it is, I think of it as a service, really. And it's a way to give back because you are planting seeds in students. They go out into the world. And that's your really, I think, the highest reward that you get, not just the paycheck that you're receiving, but when you see students that you have taught and students that you have mentored. It's just absolutely wonderful to see those seeds that germinate and to see what those students become.
Yes, I know that several young people admire you and look at you as an inspiration in their life. Who are some of your heroes, or who inspires you?
When I started the research for my first book, Servants of the People, the 1960s Legacy of African American Leadership, I met some women, women I did not know personally, and I have come to have a great deal of respect for them. People like Fannie Lou Hamer, uh, Ella Baker, the person I write about in my newest book, Septima Clark. These were people who fought during the civil rights period for rights for African Americans. So I got to know them in the last, I would say, decade. When I was growing up in my community, there were those women who were, many of them church women, teachers in the community. I think if you ask anyone who is someone who's influenced you, there's probably going to be a teacher on that very short list.
Yes.
And so there were teachers in my community, people I looked up to, I wanted to emulate. I saw qualities in them that I thought, I'd like to one day be able to do those things. And so they are nameless people for the most part. You know, they won't be in any book or maybe a newspaper article or on television, but they are people who really had a profound impact on me as I was growing up.
I agree with you. I like to call community people that inspire people everyday heroes. You know, you won't see them on a book, or you maybe won't never see a documentary about them.
Mm-hmm.
But those people impact young people more than they would probably ever even know.
I like your description, everyday people,
Yes, ma'am.
because that's who they are. They're the people who get up every day, they go to work, they then come home, they work as volunteers, they go to church on Sundays, they work in their churches, they work in their communities. They are really ordinary, everyday people. And that's one of the things that Ella Baker talked a great deal about. She was one who said, we don't need leaders who are necessarily out front, whose pictures are always in the newspapers. We need those people who are in the community, grassroots leaders. And they are the people who are respected by others in their communities. They influence them, they get the work done. And so these everyday people are the ones who really make a difference.
Yes. In your book, Servants of the People, the 1960s Legacy of African American Leadership, first and second edition, you talk about the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the qualities of servant leadership. Who are some North Carolina leaders, as well as throughout the entire country, who do you think embodies that servant leadership?
Mm-hmm. Well, the person who comes readily to mind is Reverend William Barber. I think what he has done with Moral Mondays and the stands that he's taken as initially the leader of the NAACP, that really harkens back to what was happening in the 1960s, because it's an issue that he's been able to galvanize people around. He's been able to bring together coalitions of people, and not just African American people, but Caucasians, Hispanics. I mean, it's a diverse group of people. He's focused on issues that touch the lives of many people, and that you can rally other people, a diverse group of people around, to champion those causes that he's fighting for. So he comes readily to mind. Again, people I've been in North Carolina now since 1996, so over 20 years. I've gotten to know some wonderful people here in Greensboro, North Carolina, people who have worked in the community, who have been influential in the community, women who serve on school boards, people who run for political office. I have a great deal of admiration for those people who are really working as Ella Baker did at the grassroots to make a difference, because where you make change is really in your community.
Yes. What do you think, during the civil rights movement, young people spearheaded a lot of change? What do you think young people today can do to create that same explosion of change? Like on A&T's campus, we had the A&T 4, and then right down the street we had the Bennett Bells sit in at the Woolworths. What can young people do today?
Well, I think today they are rallying around causes like Black Lives Matter. You have young people who are spearheading that movement. You have young people who are concerned about gun violence in schools and who are saying we have got to stop this. I think that those are two issues that have really brought young people out, just as it brought Bennett Bells and A&T students and Dudley High School students, Woman's College students who came out in support, Guilford College students rallied around in the 1960s. You have that happening today. And it bubbles up from the bottom. These are not issues that some organization can say you need to get engaged in these issues. These are issues that are important to young people, and they want to make a difference. I would hope that that would translate into these young people as they grow up, as they choose careers, to look at careers in public service. I would hope that they would run for political office.
Yes.
And I certainly want all of them to vote from the age that they are eligible to vote. They need to register to vote and get out and vote. And not only vote in national elections, not just for the president, but you've got to vote in those elections where school board members are chosen. The issues that are important to your life every day in your community. That's very important.
Yes, ma'am. I love your book, We Who Believe in Freedom, The Life and Times of Ella Baker. Why is it important that we continue to tell the stories of African American women that have made change in this country?
When I wrote the first book, Servants of the People, and that came out in 1996, the second edition in 2009, from the very beginning I said, I want to write a book for a juvenile audience, because I want a younger generation of young people to know about these heroes of the 1960s, because so much of that is to them ancient history now. You look at what went on in the 60s, and my goodness, look how far we are from that time. I mean, it's been over a century.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure that I keep those people and what they stood for high on the agenda of and in the knowledge base of younger people. So I really was inspired to write We Who Believe in Freedom, because I wanted to make sure younger audiences could become acquainted with people from the 1960s movement and know the kinds of sacrifices that they made, know what they went through to gain the right to vote. This was not something that came easily. There were lives that were lost, physical abuse, to get the right to vote, to get the right to sit at a lunch counter at a Woolworth's. And so I think it's important that each generation know about the history. You build on that history, and that's important.
I was reading your book. I was interested when you talked about the relationship that Ella Baker had with Dr. Martin Luther King. I even went home and told, I was like, Mom, did you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought about the quote by Malcolm X, the most disrespected person in America is the black woman. And to think about, they were both fighting for they had the same goal, but within that power structure there was friction.
Yes.
I never thought about that before, and I think that's really important that this is included in the book.
Yes. Well, I lived during that period, and I didn't realize there was that kind of friction, because I think what we saw on television was sort of a united front.
Yes.
I don't think I probed behind the scenes to know what was going on. And so as I read and researched for Servants of the People and We Who Believe in Freedom, that's when that bubbled up, and I realized it wasn't all the happy faces, that there were tensions between and among the leaders, the male leaders. But certainly women were not as respected in that movement. They were pushed to the back. And yet the women were the ones often in the organizations, NAACP, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They were the ones who were doing the grunt work, getting the job done, helping with the organizing. And yet their voices were not heard when the men were seated to make decisions. They were not at the power tables. And Ella Baker was one who refused to be silenced. Her voice was going to be heard. And she was one who thought we don't necessarily need to have these out front leaders. She said, let's go and find those people in the communities, in the small towns and cities, who have the respect of the people in those communities. Those are the real leaders. And let's make sure they have the skills and abilities. That's what we can bring to the table. There was always an educational component to what Ella Baker did. Let's give them the skills. When we leave, when the NAACP consultant leaves that community, there will still be that ability in that community because you have planted it in the people who are committed to the community and who are going to stay in the community. So she was one who identified people who were quiet leaders. She looked to women and found women leaders as well. So she made up for some of those silent voices around the tables of influence and power through the work that she did.
Amazing. So, a more fun question. Who is your favorite author and favorite book?
Now, see, that is very difficult. I have so many books on my bookshelves. It would be very hard for me to pick out any one. But what I discovered, and this was something I discovered, I guess, when I started writing my first book, and I had been reading for a very long time before 1996. But when I looked at my bookshelf, I realized that I had all of these biographies. And so I'm fascinated by the lives of other people. So biographies of people from Nelson Mandela to Eleanor Roosevelt. These are all people, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Septima Clark. Those are all books that I have enjoyed reading.
You have served as the director of the Women's Leadership Institute at Bennett College and the National African American Women's Leadership Institute, Incorporated. Share with us about your role in these institutions and how they have played a role in shaping the lives of African American women.
Well, when I came to Greensboro, it was to work at Bennett College. And after a year there in the president's office, I became the executive director of the Women's Leadership Institute. And out of that grew the National African American Women's Leadership Institute. And the wonderful thing about the National African American Women's Leadership Institute is that we selected women from across the country to come together in a leadership class. They had to be women with a commitment to community service, because after they went through the program and we took them to cities like Atlanta, we met the mayor of Atlanta, we met the superintendent of schools, we met legislators. They went to Washington, D.C. and met people who were in organizations there, the Children's Defense Fund, for example. And they were asked, after having that experience, to go back to their communities and to work on a community service project for a year. So it really was for women who already had the commitment to community service. We gave them some additional exposure, some additional skills that they could use, help to build their networks, and then sent them off into the community to do great things. And we had some wonderful projects to come out of that. So I met wonderful women, accomplished women, who became part of my network of women. And so that was really kind of a gift to me to have that program to administer, and I enjoyed it thoroughly.
You talk about the importance of women joining together, and sometimes that can be difficult.
Difficult?
Yes.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is, and how do you think women of all races can overcome that to be a part
Mhm.
of a united
Mhm.
front?
I think you have to look at what your common goals and objectives are. You have to also set aside your own ego in order to look to the greater good. When people come together around goals and objectives that they can agree on, I think that puts some of those other issues, pushes them to the side, and you become more focused on the outcomes that you want to see from whatever you're working on, whether it's your sorority and a project in that sorority, whether it's something you're doing in your church, whether it's being a volunteer in a community organization. When you focus on the goals and objectives, I think that helps to bring people together to accomplish those goals and objectives. And in civil rights movements, it's always been important to build coalitions and to have diversity and to move beyond just one ethnic group, to find friends in other ethnic groups and to work together to accomplish those things that you want to accomplish. So, and there again, Ella Baker comes to mind because she was one who reached out to other people in the communities, whether she was working at the first program that she actually did, which was at the Harlem branch of the New York City Public Library. She directed a youth program there, and she exposed young people to prominent people in the community. But she also looked at other organizations that were doing the same thing and made sure that they had an invitation to come and join her in what she was doing. So, coalition building, networking is always going to be important for big movements.
In your early career, you worked at the United Negro College Fund headquarters. Over the years, the fund has helped many college students fund their college education. What inspired you to work with students and the efforts of ensuring the African American students could attend college?
Well, I'm going to tell you how I got that job, and
Okay.
it might be helpful for you as you go out into to looking for a job. I was actually in graduate school at Teachers College, Columbia University, working on my doctorate, and I was looking for a project to do for my dissertation. And I had actually thought, and this is interesting, I had almost forgotten this. I contacted Dr. Willa Player, the first woman president at Bennett College, and I said, oh, I would love to do a history or some project of Bennett College and your presidency there. And she said, well, I thank you for that, but my papers are in a couple of locations at Bennett College and where she lived in Ohio. I don't have those pulled together. So I had to go looking for another project. And one of my professors suggested, have you thought about an organization? The United Negro College Fund at that time was headquartered in New York City. So I made a call, a cold call, got someone, said, I'm looking to do a project and I'd like to come in and talk with you. Well, they invited me and were so gracious to have me as a graduate student come to the College Fund headquarters, 62nd and York Avenue in New York City. And I worked for several months pulling together, looking through the archives of the organization, writing my dissertation. When I finished and graduated, I took a copy to the executive director, presented it to him, and thanked him so much for being so receptive to having me as a student. You're interning here. I was doing something similar there. And so I got a job offer out of that. And who knows, you might get something here. But I got a job offer. And I spent 11 and a half years at the United Negro College Fund, and they were wonderful years. I worked on the program side, and that meant that when we got funding from a foundation that wanted to have us administer a program. It might have been a program that assisted faculty members at private colleges go to graduate school to get their doctorates. It might have been a scholarship program for students. So I administered those programs. And so that's how I got to know people at the private schools, was through the United Negro College Fund. And I had the opportunity to visit many of those schools, including Bennett College several times. So it was wonderful in that way, not only for helping students who received scholarship monies, but my exposure to private historically black colleges as well.
So you work so hard, and you work so hard for other people. What do you enjoy to do in your free time?
Well, I enjoy reading, and that sounds maybe pretty dull, but I enjoy reading. I also enjoy traveling. I just returned from a 15-day bus tour of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales.
Well, now we can talk, because I just returned from England and Scotland this past December.
Oh, no.
Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
see, that's another connection
Yes,
we have.
ma'am.
And did you enjoy that as well?
I absolutely loved it. I was there studying journalism,
Oh, wonderful.
and some of the people were some of the nicest people I have ever met in my entire life.
Well, I'm in love with London. I
Yes.
love it. And I have been, I guess this was maybe my fourth or fifth trip. But I loved it. And I said, really, I would love to go there and spend some time, a period of time.
Yes.
You know,
A few years.
I had said that, and now I'm thinking it's so expensive there that it might be 3 months, 6 months. But I would really love to have that
What part
opportunity.
did you visit in London?
Well, I stayed in this trip, which was we stayed at one hotel, then we got on the road, came back to that hotel, and it was Buckingham Palace Road.
Okay.
So it was near Victoria Station.
Okay.
Yeah, very near Victoria Station. And the one thing that I did when I got there, because I flew in, left Greensboro on a Sunday, got there early Monday morning, I had already made a reservation to go on the London Eye, the Ferris wheel that's right there on the Thames.
Yes.
And so I did that. I got to walk to that, so the hotel was very close to that. I walked over there. I love cities. I guess because I'm a small town girl.
Me too.
So I really love cities. I loved New York. My first big city was Chicago. I love London. So I enjoy what big cities have to offer. But I must say, as I've grown older, there's nothing like coming back home to the PTI airport. Where you
Yeah.
can breeze through, and
Oh,
it's
yeah, it's
wonderful.
quiet.
So I love it now for this stage of life. I'm in love with Greensboro.
So what is your next adventure?
Probably just some more travel. I'm looking at where I will go, probably with my sister in 2019. I'm promoting my book, We Who Believe in Freedom. I want to do that for the next several months. Before you ask, I'm not working on another book right now. So I'm just enjoying promoting the book on Ella Baker and planning my future travels.
Well, I recommend Berlin, Germany. It's
All right.
absolutely beautiful.
All
and
right.
the culture is extremely unique. Out of any other country in Europe, it's super unique.
Okay.
So-
Well, that's where I'd like to go there. I did a Viking River cruise on the Danube, and we started in Germany, but I didn't get to Berlin. So I'll have to put that on my list. Thank you for the
Yes.
recommendation.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here at the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. And I would love to speak with you again.
Thank you for inviting me. I have so enjoyed this conversation with you.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Angelena Castro, and today I was joined by Dr. Lea Williams.